All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this live virtual town hall with your state senator for the 37th Legislative District, Senator Rebecca Saldaña. My name is Christian, and I'm going to be your off-camera moderator for the evening. Tonight's event is an opportunity for your state senator to share with you some of our accomplishments of the 2023 legislative session and to answer any questions you may have. We've compiled some questions and concerns that we received from you over the session, and Senator Saldaña is eager to answer your questions tonight. You can also submit any questions you have during this live stream in the comments section of the platform that you are using tonight. We have staff monitoring those questions as you type them, and we will try to get through those, as many as we can, at the end during our questions and answers section. We do have ASL interpreters joining us today to provide language access services. We want to thank them in advance for their help tonight, and we want to ask everyone participating tonight to please talk clearly and slowly so the interpreters can interpret accurately. Speaking of language access, we do want to mention that although we only have ASL interpreters tonight, Senator Saldaña would like to engage and hear from all people, regardless of the language you speak. If you or someone you know would like to host a community gathering in a language other than English, Senator Saldaña would be more than happy to visit your community and to provide an interpreter in your language to talk about your needs and your concerns with you. Please contact our office if you're interested in hosting an event in your language. Tonight, we also have a few guest speakers that will be joining us, and we are very excited to hear from them as well. So with that, we'll get started, and I'll turn it over to Senator Rebecca Saldaña.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. It's a beautiful night, and I do not take it for granted that you are spending that time learning about what happened this legislative session. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that each of us is streaming this, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, that we are on sacred land. We are on land that is, and first foremost was indigenous and sovereign lands from our sovereign nations. I am calling in from Rainier Beach, which was and continues to be Coast Salish lands, where the Duwamish, the Muckleshoot, the Tulalip, and Suquamish have all called this home, continue to provide leadership, and continue to be partners and co-stewards of the lands and our resources. And I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity at the state level to be able to participate and work with them closely. This evening, we are sharing with you some highlights of this legislative session. It was a banner year in many ways, where, and I have 3 screens going, and so I just want to make sure I get to the one with our opening remarks. So. And so this legislative session, I am one of 49 state senators. I think it's important because I don't want to take for granted that people spend as much time as I and my staff do at the state level of government. But I'm one of 49 state senators, and I represent, of course, the 37th, which includes Central District, International Chinatown, the Rainier Valley, Beacon Hill, and unincorporated King County that includes Skyway and the West Hills. And tonight, I'm going to provide just a little bit of how our state government works. And I apologize for those of you that live and breathe this. But we have 3 budgets. And for the past 6 years, I have worked intently in budget negotiations for the transportation budget. And as many of you will remember, last year, we had the Move Ahead package, which was transformative in making sure that we are making polluters pay and building a transportation infrastructure that centers equity, that supports all modes of transportation, whether that's public transportation, whether you are rolling in a wheelchair, or whether you are taking Uber, Lyft, taxis, or driving your own individual vehicles, whether you are a long haul driver or whether you are a city employee. And then the second budget is the Ways and Means budget. And this year, I left the Transportation Committee and joined the Ways and Means Committee. This is our largest budget and handles all behavioral health, human services, and of course, our paramount duty, education. And the last budget is the capital budget, which is connected to our operating budget and is where we support community-led and local government initiatives, whether that's around affordable housing, community centers, parks, restoration. And so that's the other budget. I do believe we have a couple of slides to share in this piece, so I will ask our staff if that's something they're able to provide. And so on the capital budget, this is a place where a lot of our community organizations, our nonprofits have engaged with us. We had many, many asks, and I'm proud to say that in working with my House colleagues, Representative Santos and Representative Chapalo Street, as well as the chair and vice chairs of our capital budget. And hopefully we will be able to hear from Senator Yasmin Trudeau, who is one of our newer members and was the vice chair of capital budget, as well as the chair of the Members of Color Caucus, which has grown significantly since the 37th initially sent me to the legislature, when at that time I was replacing our now Congressman Pramila Jayapal as the state senator. And I was the only woman of color in the state Senate at the time. We have now grown to over 6 more that are with us and have diversified the legislature in both chambers significantly since we first arrived. And, as you can see on this slide, we had over $69 million invested directly in the 37th legislative district. And we can talk more about some of these, but a couple of highlights are really important is Skyway Affordable Housing. The Skyway community has worked to organize and to recognize that it is one of our most diverse. It is where we have the largest population of African American and African immigrants, as well as people from all over our globe calling it home. And this is the first significant affordable housing investment that's been a partnership with King County and the state. And we're happy to extend that investment this year. We also have the South Seattle Community Food Hub, which services a region even larger than the 37th. Our Tubman Health Center that is going to be incredible transformational way of delivering health services, being an economic engine for creating workforce development in an area of health and behavioral health that is so desperately in need of building that pipeline for culturally competent and care and healthcare. We have the Rainier Valley Early Learning Center and the Rainier Beach High School Skills Center are just some of the projects that are getting state investments because of community leadership and advocacy over many years. Can you move to the next slide, please? Okay. And before I get to my legislation, I'll just highlight very quickly some of the values and priorities that we invested in this year with the 3 budgets. So environmental justice and equity. Environmental justice and equity are core principles that guide my policymaking. I'm dedicated to addressing historic harms and disparities faced by marginalized communities. And we invested in a couple of different ways there in creating a Job Corps to build more apprenticeship and pathways for careers in restoration and clean energy. That was invested in this year. We had a priority of a home for everyone, and we invested historic $1 billion in housing, including a record-setting $400 million in our housing trust fund. And we passed a historic middle housing bill, which Senator Trudeau was the prime sponsor of, and expanded to expand our supply for middle income. And we looked to ways that we could remove some of the harms to our human services programs and making sure that more families can qualify and have, ease and are centered in how we provide that care and keep families together. Of course, safety for all was a big priority for both in legislation and in investments. We passed the ban on the sale of assault weapons, implemented a 10-day waiting period for all firearm purchases, and provided people with a course of action should a gun seller or manufacturer fail to carry out comprehensive background checks. We also are about more historically building healthier communities, making sure that we have strengthened and protect access to reproductive services in our state, making sure that our children, especially our trans children, are safe and able to access housing without extra barriers, and making sure that we support nurses and hospitals to expand and support our nursing workforce by making sure that we put patients first and make sure that our nurses' expertise is listened to and that they have safe staffing and real breaks. In addition, of course, I spoke to our success in our paramount duty, our success for every child. We made huge investments and I would say was a significant down payment because we still have more work to do in making sure our K-12 education delivers equitable, quality, supported services and make sure that our educators and our children are valued and centered in the work. This year, we made a $3 billion investment in special education, better teacher salaries, and trying to continue to make sure that we have social emotional learning happening in our classrooms. And, just to finalize around our healthy planet and strong economy, as we know, we have a climate crisis and people across our country right now are experiencing what we've experienced, which is really poor air quality because of fires in our forests and our landscapes, and being able to make sure that we are both holding those that are the highest polluters accountable and making sure that they both perform and invest in restoration and mitigation, because right now, whether it's residents in South Park or tribes along our coast, we are feeling the impacts directly of climate, and we need to be able to address that, and also making sure that we are building a just transition so that every person in every part of our state is able to be part of and included in a clean economy and a clean fueled future for our people and our children. So I think I'm looking at a time. I think we're getting close. So I'll move to some pieces of my legislation. And again, this is a team sport. So I co-sponsored many of the bills I spoke to, and many I have not, that you might be interested in. But a couple that I'll highlight, and we'll dig in more with our special guests around other policies. So Senate Bill 5304 ensures that Washingtonians have high quality language access services by preventing financially interested entities from performing certifications and ensuring that interpreters are high quality, competent, and professional. And just want to make sure I'm going to look at my ASL interpreter, and am I doing a decent job in my speed, or should I slow down? Okay, I got a thumbs up, so I'm going to continue. But I think that is one place is I'm constantly learning how to make sure that I'm creating inclusive spaces and how to use technology in a way that creates more opportunities for people to access me and our local government, and not unintentionally then creating different barriers for others. So I'm always looking to learn how we can do a better job in communicating with you and making sure that you're getting material that's useful, helpful, and relevant to your lives. And so SB 5320 is another bill, and this is about part of my work to make sure that we have a just transition, that we have safe and careers and opportunities for how we electrify. And this creates additional eligibility requirements to obtain a journey level electrician certification, and restores some pathways for certification, particularly for people that are coming from out of state, because we have many people arriving, whether as refugees or whether as folks from other parts of our country looking for opportunities and the beauty that we have here in Washington State. And also for our military to make sure that their full experience is able to transfer into this civilian workforce. And so that is a way that as we are having higher higher voltage, that's the word I was looking for, higher voltage, to be able to make sure that we are electrifying our vehicles and electrifying our homes and our buildings, is making sure that we have a workforce that is top notch and safe, and something that provides for being able to provide for their communities and their families. And the last one I'll highlight right now, because I think many of you have heard the graduate students at University of Washington are going on strike. They are in active negotiations with the University of Washington. I'm hopeful that both parties will come back to the table and be able to resolve making sure that these are our future scientists, our future educators, the folks that are bringing $1 billion into the university community alone, creating solutions that we are then putting into policy and into our, into new businesses. And so it's very important that they have access to childcare. Graduate students are people of all ages and all experiences, and that's an issue that is really critical to them. But what this bill does is 5256 is expands the right for graduate students in our smaller schools, Western Washington, the Evergreen State, Central, for them to be able to exercise their right to organize. I know that the Western University campus, both the administrators and the graduate students were actively wanting to, respect the right of workers to organize, and this legislation allows them to move in that direction, which to me is very important, because our democracy is only as strong as our weakest link. And if people need to not only have the right to vote, people like me, or who serves and represents them in local government, they need to be able to make sure that they can organize and have experience democracy in their workplaces, which is where a lot of people spend most of their time, because a democracy is like a muscle. You have to exercise it, and the more that you're exercising it in every space, in every corner, the stronger our economy will be, and the stronger our democratic institutions and our communities will be. So those are three that I'll highlight. We had a record year of bills that I-Prime sponsored that made it all the way to the governor's desk, and I'm happy to speak with more. With that, I will see if there's another slide or if we're transitioning. Christian, is there another slide? Or should we stop sharing and then move to the next portion of our town hall?
Yeah, so it looks like we're right on time to allow our first guest of the night to jump on. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And now we would like to introduce our first guest of the night, Senator Yasmin Trudeau. She's a senator of the 27th Legislative District, and she is also chair of the Members of Color Caucus. Senator Trudeau, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a little bit like coming home. For those of you that haven't met me, Yasmin Trudeau, I get the privilege and honor of representing my hometown, Tacoma, in the 27th Legislative District. But I actually started as a legislative assistant for then State Senator Pramila Jayapal. And so it just, I know I'm not in the room with you, but I just want to say thank you so much, because those experiences in serving the 37th is really what shaped my policy priorities and the type of leadership I watched. And just for some context, I then moved into a staff role at the SDC and had the opportunity to staff the Members of Color Caucus and Senator Saldaña when she came into that role, and just watched how transformative her strength in leadership really is. She really brings just such a unique way of supporting people and bringing them along. And as you could imagine, many of our MOCC priorities overlapped with Senator Saldaña's. Hers, actually, I would say the other way around. Most of Senator Saldaña's bills are rooted in race equity and really fighting for our communities. So there's quite a bit of overlap on our list, and most of the priorities which came from Senator Saldaña. So I can talk a little bit about what MOCC does, but I just wanted to make sure to have that context and also to recognize folks that have come before me, like Rebecca, that have really shaped the way that I look at the role that I have now. I heard that folks may want to hear a little bit about the Members of Color Caucus, who we are, what our priorities are. And then I can talk a little bit about housing. I know I was prompted that some folks might be curious about middle housing and others. So I'll speak a little bit about MOCC and about some of the housing stuff, and then I'll stop and see whether, Senator Saldaña, you want me to expand on anything else, or if I didn't touch on something that you would like me to. So right now, what's really exciting about the Members of Color Caucus, when I started as an LA back in 2015, there were 3 members of color that were active, 4 in the MOCC. And now there are 10 members, including myself, which actually make up about a third of the caucus. There are 29 members of the Senate Democratic Caucus. And so there's just something really beautiful that's happened. And again, really pointing to Senator Saldaña's leadership in guiding and supporting folks as they've entered this space. Because I can tell you, when I was in the space before, and during that transition from Senator Jayapal to Senator Saldaña, that space was not a welcoming, inviting space. And both of them have done so much to transform it. So kudos again to the 37th. Now, the MOCC, in addition to having 10 members, our mission and vision, I could read it out to you, but really what it is our strength, recognizing that our strength is rooted in our diversity, that we are not a monolith as a member of Color Caucus, but that we recognize that we wear many hats, including representing not just our districts, but community members that may feel in relationship to us or may feel that we are leaders to them, even if they're not in our district, right? I know for the Muslim community, for example, me serving as the first American Muslim in the state legislature is a really big deal. And I hear from folks across the state and across the country about how much that means. So really just recognizing that we bring all of ourselves to the work and that we want to uplift all the communities that we serve. And so that's really at the center of it all. You know, obviously we want to create equal opportunities. We want to make sure there's political representation and that we are advancing racial equity. And again, shout out to Senator Saldaña, who has brought our caucus along very specifically on racial equity work internally and externally. So I get to build off of that, which is amazing. You know, a couple of our main objectives is equity and economic employment opportunities, making sure our policies are rooted in equity and justice, actively fighting against racism, bigotry, and hate. I think a lot of times people think in a legislature, everything is about introducing bills, but actually a lot of the organizing that the members of Color Caucus does is in response to something that we think may have a race equity component, whether that's a positive thing we want to uplift or many times really fighting back against things that we think are going to cause harm to all the communities that we represent. And then again, making sure that we're protecting civil rights of every person regardless of immigration status. So when we are establishing policies, that we are being inclusive and really standing by what we say in putting people first. And that's the larger that's the larger caucus. I don't know what the right word, mission or vision for this session was putting people first. So we see the MOCC as a check on that, making sure that we really are talking about all people when we put policy forward, and then creating a support system, not only for the members of color, but as I mentioned, it's personal to me, for staff, interns, and allies that work at the legislature. I know Senator Saldaña's office is a safe space. Sometimes my office is a safe space. So when I run into people, I can often say, hey, this might feel like a really lonely space. If you just want a cup of tea, go ahead and come in my office. Some people want to go grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and talk about what the challenges are for them, in seeking permanent employment. So those are all things that we make ourselves available to. And that includes mentoring and offering support for elected officials of color at every level of government. So that's really in a nutshell. The rest is just in terms of process of our priorities, that has to do more with what it is that our members of color put forward as the priorities that they want to see. So and then we go through a vetting process. So a lot of Senator Saldaña's bill, she had a post-conviction access to counsel bill that came through the Law and Justice Committee. The Law and Justice Committee is chaired by Manka Dhingra, who is the state senator for the 45th and also on the Members of Color Caucus. I am her vice chair. So it's the opportunity to really think deeply about what these policies mean and have those conversations in partnership, coordination, and support of one another, and realizing that sometimes we all have to step in and advocate for the things that are going to be important to us all. I could talk about other priorities, but housing, I don't know, Senator Saldaña, would you like me to expand on anything specific related to housing? I heard maybe middle housing, but I want to be responsive and not take up a lot of space. So.
No, I appreciate it so much. And I think both what I spoke to, can you hear me?
You're cutting out a little bit.
Okay, got it. Okay. My phone or my computer is almost dying for some reason. So I will work on that. And it does look like it's not working right now.
We can hear you, but then you just muted.
I might have to bring my computer inside because it's very slow on my side. So it's showing delay. So if you can't hear me, if you just want to speak a little bit to how the capital budget works and the housing policy would be great.
Absolutely. So one of the roles that I also have the privilege of taking on in the state Senate was another actual portfolio that I had staffed, which is capital budget, right? The opportunity to build infrastructure, which again, as a legislator of color, and especially as a young woman of color, infrastructure is not necessarily what people have on their mind. You often think of infrastructure as being like roads or sort of these cold hard pieces. And for me, I saw the opportunity to really use the capital budget to build and focus on infrastructure that is responsive to what we're seeing right now. And that is a housing crisis. We were able to historically, we doubled the housing trust fund at $400 million this session, which is incredible. That goes specifically to affordable housing. And I want to call out one thing that's special and personal to me. And that is, for the first time, dedicated $25 million to building homes, affordable homes for people that have disabilities, so that they are able not just to seek housing that can accommodate them, but that we are able to build the housing that they can, that they don't have to seek out a specific unit. They can go and that housing can be responsive to what they need. And also working with some local organizations, nonprofit organizations, actually out of the 37th, that also work with communities of color and cultural, like newer immigrant communities, to ensure that that housing is actually going to be responsive to the ways that their families operate, which are much more sort of community oriented. So, in addition, there were a number of housing policy bills, but to me, that housing component in the capital budget, it's not the thing that gets the sexy headlines like a bill does, but it's going to be the thing that actually starts putting shovels into the ground and getting us the housing we need. In addition, behavioral health. We talk a lot about the need for behavioral health, but we all recognize that there's a lack of infrastructure. We don't have the beds, we don't have the buildings, we don't have the places for people to go. And so what I realized is, that's a great opportunity. And that's a great opportunity for us to think about using capital dollars to make those investments and to help support local governments in making those investments. So that was a one thing actually that I also want to call out, in terms of tying in the members of color caucus priorities, and just the perspectives that we bring, is that in addition to just building sort of I wouldn't say traditional, because I think we are really trying to be creative with behavioral health, but thinking more deeply about trauma-informed care and the type of trauma-informed care that is culturally responsive, and partnering with, like Lummi Nation, right? About what it means for Native populations to engage in trauma-informed care. That trauma-informed care is very deep and very important to that community. But you realize that that's translatable amongst all communities. And so that's in partnership. So folks from, citizens of the Lummi Nation can attend that behavioral health facility once built, as can the people in the broader community that are outside of the Lummi Nation's land designation. So that I think is just a really important way to think about something like infrastructure that can be creative, that can be culturally and informed, right, and rooted in race equity. And that's really just going to build the thing that you can actually touch and open the door that someone's going to live in someday.
Thank you so much, Senator Trudeau. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. Now it's been 30 minutes, so we're going to take just a couple minutes to allow our interpreters to switch. We're going to bring on our second ASL interpreter. All right, now we would also like to welcome our second guests for tonight. We have Elaine Ishihara. Elaine Ishihara and her family have lived in the Rainier Beach, Southeast Seattle area for over 60 years. Elaine is the executive director of the API Coalition, Advocating Together for Health, a coalition she helped organize in 1997 to address the health impact of commercial tobacco use in the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community. And also with her tonight is Tuikni Vo, a resident of Southeast Seattle, the 37th District. She's also the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Asian Pacific Islander Coalition, Advocating Together for Health. Thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you for Senator Saldaña for inviting Whitney and I to join your town hall tonight. I think you wanted us to talk a little bit about SB 5365, or...
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, both of you. And I think part of what I appreciate you taking the time. I know you guys are so busy and get so many requests. is for that piece of legislation, and just a little bit of how long you've been working on this, and I think what's helpful to constituents in hearing this story is the importance of being centered in our values, having, what it is to work in a coalition, and how, just from your perspective, sometimes it takes time, but what it is and why do you think it matters to the people of the 37th?
Okay. Well, and so I'll get started because I think when I started this, my hair wasn't gray. But I think that it's really important to understand that growing up in Southeast Seattle, I mean, my family moved there when I was like in the early 60s. So we moved from the Central District, which was redlined, and we moved out to Rainier Beach. And basically, I've lived there all my life and raised our family. And I feel like between calling Southeast Seattle my home, but my community was also the Chinatown International District. And I grew up during a period of time when I had the opportunity to learn and from Uncle Bob, Bernie White Bear, Roberto Maestas, and Larry Gossett, or the Gang of Four. And the key points on their organizing and changing community was really about building relationships, making sure that communities and people that were most affected were involved in the process, and that people needed to have information to be making informed decisions. And not only that, I mean, they had a lot of fun, but it was like unconditional support for each other, where they would be there in support and not always need to be on the platform. And so I feel like that has been very instrumental in how we organize our coalition, but also partner, like with Southeast Seattle Peace Coalition, the cross-cultural organization, Center for Multicultural Health, El Centro. And so this is how we come together to develop our policy agenda. And at Senate Bill 5365, the journey started in 2017 when the state started taking a look at increasing the age of tobacco sales to 21. And the intent was that if you did this, then it would, youth wouldn't have access to the product and would have healthier outcomes, which we agree with. But what we didn't agree with was that if you were under 21, that a peace officer or the Liquor Cannabis Board had the authority to stop somebody that they thought were underage and detain them until they could show proof of ID, which kind of, in our minds, counterintuitive to healthy youth and communities, and also how the industry targets young people. They're addicted to nicotine, and they shouldn't be victimized. Or people that use tobacco products, having smoked menthol cigarettes since I was 16 years old until I started doing this work with AppyCat, was really the other piece of it. And living in a very diverse environment. So we organized, and we would go and testify against Tobacco 21 until finally they said, you know what, you should pull this section out and really, and this was the advocates, these were the lobbyists from heart, lung cancer, mainstream organizations. We met with the Liquor Cannabis Board, we met with the AG's office, and yet at the same time, it was like we still felt that there was a role for the community. And this is where community organizing, and this is where the one thing that I think we learned from the Gang of Four is don't take no that should never be a deterrent to how you move forward. If you feel like it's right, then you should continue to pursue that. And then thankfully, in 2021, Senator Saldaña, you were the one that introduced this bill as a standalone. And even then, it's taken 3 years. And I guess, and also, these 4 leaders who always had strong women that worked alongside them, not just behind them, because we know women can multitask, is that they always worked with younger people. And to make sure that, young people had an opportunity to be able, because they're the ones being targeted. And so this is, Twitney is just an example of the many youth that we work with. And so finally this year, I think we were all surprised that it passed. And I really had the opportunity to take a look and understand that policy change really requires a lot of work, and it's not just the high level advocates, but once you provide community with information, then they will support. And I think that's what has happened. And also we've been able to have better relationships with the advocates. I mean, it's taken a long time for us to have meaningful relationships. Yes, very good. And so I don't know, Twitney, do you want to add anything?
No, just that being part of AppyCat at such a young age gave me so many skills to be able to public speak. And I remember testifying on this bill like 2 to 3 times in a row, remotely from home during the pandemic and in person prior to that as well. So it's really nice to see this from the start and the end.
And Whitney, when you started, I mean, when I first met you, I think you were still middle school,
Yes.
and then a high school student. And how did you get involved with AppyCat to begin with?
Yeah, so my mother is a community organizer, and she served part of the coalition on AppyCat's side. And through that, I got involved with the youth programming. I was really invested in tobacco, specifically because of usage within my own family. And this kind of, I became really, really invested and interested in the issue. And I now work full time as well on staff.
That's fantastic. And I think that is, how I got involved in this work as well is, that definitely saw the effects of alcohol and tobacco as really a self-coping mechanism for not having access to real healthcare and experiencing decades of racism within my own family and our communities. But also just seeing the epidemic that was happening in our high schools and knowing retailers that were selling to underage children I knew. And so, what this bill does do is it does increase a fine for retailers and really holds them accountable to say that's where the identification needs to be asked for. And if there is not identification, you don't sell it. And then, we're hoping with this money, plus we are able to get a specific proviso within the operating budget to increase funding for prevention and cessation programs, because a lot of programs are not tailored to younger people. And that's when you're most susceptible to lifelong addiction, but also I think where you have the most hope to be able to quit if that, and find alternatives if you have the right support. So we're hopeful. We'll be looking to the Peace Coalition and to AppyCat to make sure that it implements correctly and that the money makes it into our communities. But really grateful and honored. This is something that I was not an expert in, but because there's experts in our community, I was able to play my role as a legislator, trying to push and educate and work with my colleagues to understand what it would take for them to feel comfortable and moving this legislation forward. So just thank you. And thank you for coming on behalf of AppyCat, but also the whole coalition.
Well, yeah, and the Peace Coalition has been very instrumental and thankfully, this is how we're very fortunate in the 37th district and how our policymakers engage with community. And I believe the connection that you made with the Peace Coalition was very instrumental, right? Based at I think Aki Krosa at one point and Mike Graham Squire and his leadership, it's like we're able to kind of balance our strengths together. And that's what it really makes a difference. So thank you so much.
Yeah, that's very true. Just a shout out to Mike and also to Neighborhood House that has been kind of the backbone of that coalition. And I really appreciate the fact that, you know, every coalition requires someone to spend a little extra time in just keeping us all connected. And that is what they have been able to do for this coalition. And it's really made a difference, like you said.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much again, Elaine, and thank you, Thwikni, as well, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your story. All right, well, now we will pass along and move on to our next guest. We want to invite Eli Goss. Eli Goss is the Policy Director at One America, a power-building organization which is rooted in immigrant and refugee communities founded by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. They have been organizing and lobbying for over 10 years in Washington across multiple issues from labor to higher ed to reproductive rights. They are originally from Texas. Thank you for joining us, Eli. The floor is yours.
Great. Hi, Senator Saldaña, and hello, everyone here in the 37th District. It's so great to be with y'all tonight and talk about some of the awesome things we got to work with Senator Saldaña on this session, especially around immigrant and refugee rights. I guess to start out, I actually kind of want to ground us in what's happening around immigration nationally and why that makes what we're doing here in Washington even more important and critical. I know many of us, when we were able to secure the presidency in 2020, really hoped to have another chance to pass comprehensive immigration reform and give a pathway to citizenship for the over 11 million folks in our communities across the country. And we've seen failed action on that time and time again. And now we have seen a locked out House with not just Republican control, but really vitriol and MAGA Republican control of the House. So we know we have our work cut out for us across the nation with the upcoming elections federally to take back the House and get us back on track to giving people the protection and dignity that they inherently deserve as members of our community. And in the meantime, again, that makes Washington State really a leader across the entire nation around what we can do to ensure that everyone in our communities, regardless of their immigration status, is able to not only survive, but truly thrive. And so that's why at One America, our comprehensive issue platform is called A Thriving Home, because we believe that we don't want people to just be tolerated or to survive. Again, we want them to have the services and the support and the rights to live with dignity and to be true, equitable members of our communities. And so with that, of course, One America, we work across the state. We're housed in the 37th District. And we work both in King County, South King County, Vancouver, Yakima, Skagit. And we also are multi-issue because we know that immigrants live multi-issue lives, as we know Congresswoman Jayapal often speaks to. And so we work across the spectrum of education policy, early learning, democracy, and economic justice, as well as fighting for immigration reform at the federal level. So at the state level, we've been working on some really bold campaigns, and in particular with our champion, Senator Saldaña, around economic justice and voting rights. In particular, we've been working on a bill that Senator Saldaña has been sponsoring for the last 3 years, and we're excited to be coming back and fighting for it again around expanding unemployment for undocumented workers. We know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw what was already a problem, which is that based on your immigration status, even if you were doing equal work, you were not given equal benefits. And not only did that have drastic consequences around families' health, it also had drastic consequences around communities' economic mobility and survival. So we worked together with Senator Saldaña and the rest of the caucus in the House and the Senate and Governor Inslee in a huge coalition led by immigration groups, labor, faith, and other progressive advocates, and launched the Washington Immigrant Relief Fund. And to date, it has put out over $400 million into the hands of undocumented community members that have not been able to apply for federal and other forms of state assistance. And so while that was such an important stopgap during the pandemic, we know that there are structural fixes that we have to work towards over time, which is why we're working on the unemployment system to ensure that workers have equal access. And we're really excited to, again, continue to work on that, find creative ways to fund it this upcoming ledge session, and also really work on the narrative that every worker, regardless of immigration status, deserves benefits. We've also been working together on the Washington Voting Rights Act 2.0. We were really excited to pass that bill a couple years ago to ensure that racial bias in our voting system had more of a checks and balance so that every voter, regardless of their zip code, could have true access to democracy. And we know that through the many lawsuits we've been able to win through that bill, and in particular out in Yakima, got some tweaks that we saw that we could do to really strengthen the process. And so we're really excited to see the Washington Voting Rights Act 2.0 pass this year. And Senator Saldaña worked with our other House champion, Representative Charlotte Mena, who also comes from the One America family. And we're really excited to have that be one of Representative Mena's first bills to pass. And so now we're excited this coming session to work together on unemployment. We also, I think to highlight a couple of things is, what it really takes to win some of these bigger structural policies, of course, isn't just having the best policy and great legislative champions. It's also really about our elections and our endorsement work, as well as our grassroots organizing and our base leaders across the state and the strength of our coalitions. And so really want to highlight and reiterate just what an effort this is collectively, truly across the state, to make Washington State a leader in the nation. And I guess to close out, I'll just mention a few other things, which is some of our other issue areas, such as education. Some examples of what we're working on there is really around multilingualism. We know the Washington State public school system continues to center and be English-centric. And while many school districts are leaders in many of the schools in the 37th and also in South King County around expanding language access services for families, as well as dual language classrooms, we have such a long way to go to ensure that our public school system has the appropriate funds, as well as the pipeline for native bilingual teachers to be able to teach in bilingual classrooms. And so we're also excited to continue working on those programs. And in regards to early learning, we know that many women of color and immigrant women are often our childcare providers in our communities, and they continue to be paid poverty wages. And so we are working with many of our early learning partners to ensure that we have both adequate pay for providers, but that burden doesn't happen on working families. So we want to both increase access for working families and increase bilingual preschools, because we know the sooner kids are learning their native language, the better, and as well as ensure that providers are getting paid a living wage, doing such critical work in our communities. And then I can't end, and I know Senator Saldaña is with us on this, we can't end without mentioning the need for progressive revenue. We know that our state budget and our state tax code is outdated and unfair and continues to put a burden on working families. And so we are really excited to continue working together on the fight to fix our tax code and ensure that the uber wealthy pay their fair share. There's no reason for Washington State to have working families continue to suffer and struggle the way they do in a state that has so much wealth. And so we're really excited to work on that and make it fair so that everyone truly has an equal playing field. So I'll pause there and pass it back to Senator Saldaña.
Thank you so much, Eli. And again, I'm so glad for your leadership and the fact that we have a One America in Washington that's centered in Washington State, even though they work nationally, because it makes our jobs so much easier. We're looking at hundreds and hundreds, almost 1,000 pieces of legislation every session. And if we're not doing the work now, in terms of preparing and educating and listening to what's happening, there's no way that we get through the 487 I think pieces of legislation that actually became law this year. And so it's having community partners and experts in the 37th. We're very lucky. I will say that piece around progressive revenue is really important. What Eli spoke to is a few years ago, we started with some things, right? Holding banks a little bit more accountable and passing the capital gains legislation, which thank goodness that it withstood the challenge, the legal challenge. And so we are collecting that revenue, and it is allowing us to make the next investment towards making sure that educators in our early learning are paid a fair wage and that they can actually thrive as a business. We pay what it takes to take care of our children. We historically are paying 83%, 85% of what it costs. And then they have to just make it up somewhere. And so, we've, with Fair Start for Kids, which is what is a big part of what is funded with the capital gains, we do have a plan to be able to get that to full funding. But right now, I think we're at 87% when July comes around. And so what we saw in our at the last town hall we had, right, is that we had outdoor preschools that are huge and important, and it was really, with the COVID and with the way that we have historically funded it, made it impossible. And it left educators that are skilled and talented, it left parents and children in a lurch. And so, that is why, in our capital budget, we made extra effort to make sure that we're funding and supporting both keeping doors open. We got operating dollars for the launch, which is right there in Mount Baker, to be able to keep their doors open. It's a Black-led early education and care system place, and making sure Skyway and expanding the program that is in another program about Mount Baker is a partnership with the University of Washington to make sure that we are creating pathways for more educators and helping them with their economic business plans, as well as providing creative and essential culturally competent care for our children. I think the other piece, just to kind of highlight already what we're seeing impact, is with multilingual education, is a partnership with Western Washington University and Highline school districts, now including Federal Way and Renton school districts, to be able to grow our own. And so it allows paraeducators to be able to become multilingual, paraeducated, licensed with that specialty, or bilingual teachers. And I got to meet some of the students that are in the program right now and their mentors, and those that are incoming. And thanks to the advocacy of partners like One America, as well as many others, we were able to create a new pathway where they can both be bilingual and special ed specific paraeducators into teachers. And we know that we need to grow them even faster, but it was really exciting to see that it's working, and that there is a way for us to scale these when we have everyone paying their fair share. I think that the 37th and One America and our coalitions of communities, we are making a difference on this issue. We had, for the first time, I think, the legislative my colleagues in the Ways and Means Committee, rather than saying, we can't do more, they're saying we're going to do as much as we can. We recognize it's a down payment. We recognize that it is not meeting the whole need, but it is important. It's significant. It's bigger than we ever have in a really long time, made investments in housing and education. And so I think that we are building we are making inroads to be able to come back and look at how do we further right size our tax code and make sure that we're modernizing our state government to be the partner that workers and private enterprise and community need. And that is unemployment insurance for undocumented workers. It's making sure that we have portable benefits like the long-term, like Washington Cares Act, and making sure that it actually functions. We know that it's hard. It's hard for change to happen when people see that coming out of their paycheck. But what we need to build is a fabric and a safety net that includes everyone. When people think, oh, things were better before, it was never better for Black folks. It was never better for immigrants and refugees. It was never better for women and mothers that are trying to work and provide for their families. It definitely was not better for our young people that are seeing epidemics in eating disorders and mental health. It was 1 year ago in a month that 21 people, 19 children that are the age of my fifth grader, were shot and killed in a very brutal way in the town of Uvalde in Texas, where Eli has roots and where I have roots. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that this is not a place where we're trying to build big government. We want the right size government that's going to be able to partner with our communities and support our local, school boards and our local cities and towns and sewer districts, and making sure that it actually is creating the kind of fabric and the kind of community that we can breathe, that people and our neighbors can breathe and feel some safety in our neighborhoods, whether they are living in the 37th or whether they're living in Yakima or Spokane or Mabton. And so I think those are things that are really important to me. I really thank Eli for coming on to share a bit of the work that One America does, their great work, but they're also part of a coalition, the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, that just today I was at a coffee shop, ran into 3 of the outreach folks. They knew who I was, and they initially just smiled, but then they came and made sure that I was working. And it's because, even though we don't have DeSantis coming and shipping people on a plane, we have right now, Riverton United Methodist is welcoming and trying to provide some shelter for over 80 Congolese families that have arrived. And so there's a network that the city of Seattle and King County have been huge partners and leaders in. We as a state are trying to have significantly grown our investment and partnership, but there's still so many gaps. So with that, I just want to thank you. I know that, Christian, we have had many questions come in before we even started this town hall, and I expect that we may have more coming in on our live streams right now.
Yes, thank you. And thanks again, Eli, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us in this space. All right, well, before we move on to our next and final section, which is the Q&A section, we're going to take just a couple minutes to go ahead and switch our interpreters one more time. And while we do so, this is just a good reminder to please talk clearly and slowly so that our interpreters can follow along. So as Senator Saldaña was saying, we have received a lot of questions, and we invite you, if you're watching us now, to please go ahead and comment or type your questions in the chat of the platform that you are watching us on. We have staff that are monitoring the comments, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can during this last part. Senator Saldaña, if you are ready to begin, I can start with the first question, and I will try to place it on the screen if we have it available so that we can follow along. The first question from one of our constituents is 2 questions actually that are related to each other. What are your thoughts on making South Seattle safer for pedestrians? And along those lines, how would you balance pedestrian and local car access to Lake Washington Boulevard?
Thank you so much for that question. And I know it is a challenge right now of how do we share our roads and how do we make sure that we're all able to get home and to school and to our places of worship safely. So Move Ahead Washington, first and foremost, is rooted in my experience of being a resident here in Rainier Beach. I took the 42, which no longer exists, to my job at the time when I first moved here. And I saw so many kids not being able to afford to get on the bus. And when they're on the bus, I listened into some of their conversations that they might be having a little loudly, and just saw too much despair and barriers keeping them from being able to realize their brilliance and their potential. And so I got involved with the Rainier Beach Action Coalition and the youth in Rainier Beach. And I learned from them that they couldn't get to school because they couldn't afford it. And the only way that they could get a bus pass from the school district is that they lived 2.5 miles away. And so we worked on that. The youth had made a priority of being able to have access to Orca cards, and that was a big priority for them. With Move Ahead Washington, we took that policy, and thanks to Chair Senator Elias and Chair Fye in the House, we created that policy for the whole state, that youth under 18 ride free, whether it's on the bus, whether it's on our ferries, our light rail, or even Amtrak eventually. And that is my priority, is making sure that our young people and our elders are able to access public transportation. And during COVID, we saw that it was very risky and that there was very little ways for people to get out and about. So I support, although I know it's not supported by everyone, the idea of rethinking how we build our infrastructure and our right of way, that it's been about cars and cars that pollute. And when you look at who is behind that policy, it was the oil companies and the multinational auto manufacturers that manufactured the need for us to have a private vehicle in order to be able to access basic needs and be able to provide, get to our work, get to the grocery store. And in the South End, I'm proud that we are one of the greenest neighborhoods of our state, of the state and of the city of Seattle, because we have more people that, for a variety of reasons, whether that's income or because they choose to, less people with vehicles that live in our neighborhoods and are able to use transportation and walk to get to their resources. At the same time, I know many of us have been displaced and we have to drive in order to get back to our jobs and back to our places of worship. So I think it's about how do we make sure that it's not either or, and how do we make sure that we are bringing ourselves along and thinking about it. And so I want to provide resources to be able to make sure that we are prioritizing safety. During COVID, we had more people lose their lives. I've seen people speeding down the bus lane or in the middle lane, and it's not worth it. Be late to wherever you're going, because we have lost too many people. And I don't think everyone knows, but one of my college friends, died trying to cross the street. And so it's really, that's where I come from. So I think to me, the question I have is, for the people that are talking about, what the values are behind the question around how to balance pedestrian and local car access. Obviously, people need to be able to use their vehicles. That's the way, to get where they need to go. But I do think that there's a way for us to open up that Lake Washington is a public amenity. And as we're facing hotter summers and we're giving more neighbors ways to be able to access this amenity, being able to close it down to prioritize people walking and rolling is important. But, people need to be able to get to the destination. And of course, the people that are living there should be able to access their homes. But I think that's where I generally would come from. I know that the city is actively engaging. I'm not as aware where we are with the final decision. But I do think balancing, maybe not completely shut down, but increasing opportunities for people and making it clear when those opportunities are, so that people can plan, to be able to access it or to adjust accordingly when it is closed on certain days. I know that it's good for the salmon to not have cars polluting and to give them a break and a vacation from that. But also I understand, the pain that might come with, and I guess, the challenge of that for some people, the only time they can access that view is when they're in their vehicle, because their lives are so busy in order to be able to make things work for them. So I hope that's helpful in terms of my values of where I'm coming from. And if there's specific policy that you think the state has a role in being able to support, or just me as a neighbor, I'm happy to engage further on that topic.
Thank you so much, Senator Saldaña, for your answer to that question. Time is flying, and we have about 20 minutes left of our town hall. We're trying to get us through as much questions as we can. We have a few that we've received, or several that we've received, and we want to get through a few that we're receiving right now in your chats. Another reminder to please go ahead and drop those in the chat of your platform. The next question that we have is, what are your thoughts on gun violence, especially as we hear the increase in gunfire and gun violence in our district?
I think we have too many of them out and accessible to people that are in crisis and people that need supports. And so that's my first part. And that's why I have been really clear and stand with the young people, with the Alliance for Gun and Safety, with the grandmothers and the mothers that have been advocating for that. And I was very proud that we were able to ban assault weapons. At the same time, we are not taking away guns that people already have in their possession. And so I think I'm really proud of also supporting and increasing opportunities for people to decide that they don't need these weapons, or to be able to get a lockbox so that they can have it when they need it and keep it secure. I've been part of neighborhood conversations and circles about guns and gun culture, and how do we balance different perspectives in that. But I would say, it's important. I listen to the young people, and in this case, we have too many guns. Children do not feel safe in their schools. Educators are having to do lockdowns on the regular. And again, we have lost so many lives that were pedestrian and two people in a having a dispute on the streets too often ends up with one person never making it home. And so I think that is something that I care deeply about, of changing the culture. We are the only country that insists on having military weapons in our neighborhoods, and I just think they do not have a place there.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, what are you doing to make it easier for our community to adapt to the extreme weather that we are experiencing? For example, lack of access to AC as heat waves become more intense.
Great. I'm not going to use my notes, so I don't have the specific bill numbers, but this is a place where we, in our investment with the climate commitment dollars. So I know Cap Invest was not our EJ community's first preference as a piece of legislation, but it is what we have as a state. And with it, we've had auctions and had more revenue come in the first quarter than was expected. We're balancing and seeing how that is. But I, as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, and as someone that has been the prime sponsor and vocal person for environmental justice, was able to work with Senator Wynn, with Senator Robinson, and Senator Rolfes on our side to be able to invest in making sure that apartments, buildings, and local homes are able to access heat pumps and be able to install those in an affordable way, creating, again, pathways and green jobs across our state, and creating those just transitions. Definitely making sure that we have cooling centers. Again, I think it is making sure that we're making the best use of our lakes and our public center, our community centers, to be able to make sure that people have access to cooling stations and being able to support themselves. Of course, we also invested extremely in mitigation and restoration in our forests that the state manages, and trying to also support our urban canopy. And so those are some of the ways that we're trying to adjust, making sure that we are one of the eligible funds one of the eligible uses for those funds has been being able to, where we need to relocate communities to higher ground, to safer ground, and also making sure that we are investing in sustainable agriculture and supporting the ag industry and the workers in that industry, to make sure that they have access to shade and to water, that we have built in stronger labor protections for workers that are working outside in these conditions.
Thank you very much. The next question: what are you doing to support immigrants in Washington State?
Great. So we heard a little bit from One America about how I partner with immigrant-led organizations across our state. And so for sure, it is pushing for unemployment and insurance for undocumented workers. It's making sure that I was very happy and excited to support our Paid Medical Leave Act, and those benefits are eligible to anyone regardless of their status. I also am the prime sponsor of legislation a couple cycles ago to make sure that our hate crimes and our Washington State discrimination laws protect people, including those that are being discriminated and harmed because of their ethnicity, of course, but also because of their perceived or real immigration status, because we've seen the rise of hate crimes and harm to immigrants or those that look like they might be an immigrant. So those are a couple of ways that we have tried to strengthen protections. Of course, the other piece, again, I wasn't the prime, but was partner in support of, is making sure that people, regardless of status, can access healthcare. Last year, we allowed that, and this year we made sure that we included it sufficiently funded in our budget. And so starting July, we'll start rolling out that program so that when I think this fall, people will be able to access the healthcare exchange and have access to subsidies that are state specific to make sure that families can access healthcare.
Thank you very much, Senator. We also want to take some time and get some of the comments that are coming in right now on our Facebook. We have one from Linda Seltzer. Could you update us on homebuyer programs for middle and low income persons and families? There are definitely interested working families.
Great. So again, one of my values that I hold as a state senator of the 37th is making sure that people that have homes and own homes here in our district are able to stay in their homes, particularly for our elders, for our Black and immigrant and people of color, but also all of our elders that are aging and may find the cost of maintaining their homes a challenge. So we increased funds for being able to repair, but also to retrofit into being more sustainable housing for folks. We also have passed the Covenant home ownership bill, which recognizes the impact of redlining and making it harder for Black individuals, but also for Jewish folks, for people of Asian descent, to be able to access home ownership and wealth generation that comes with that. And so it is a new first in the nation program that creates a new revenue to support increasing our home ownership programs that we have, like that allows for education and training, along with down payments and access to interest or to better loans. And so that's a program that is going in place as well. I think the other piece too is looking where it makes sense to increase opportunities for making it easier for condos or homes that are built in to our infill here in the 37th. We are seeing a lot of buildings go up that are rentals, but also have made sure that there's revenue and option for home ownership, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, Home Site, is that there's going to be more of that housing available as well. And so those are some of the ways, and just being able to build more housing so that there's options for people to choose. And so hopefully we'll start seeing some of that investment come as early as July, and look forward to hearing more specifically if there's a specific program that you're thinking of.
All right, thank you so much. Our next question: what are you doing to support Seattle teachers, students, and parents?
Great. I am going to actually turn my notes, but one was, of course, making sure that we had strong and funded contracts for our Seattle Public School educators and teachers and families, supporting, looking at how do we support making sure that every student can succeed and has the investments they need. So again, that the $3 billion extra dollars going into special education was advocating strongly for increasing our funding for transportation and making sure that we're keeping our school communities whole, even as we are still struggling with balancing and getting to a good, a balanced place of our enrollment, right? Because the way that federal money and state money then usually happens is a kind of per student and based on, and so I think, so that has been something that we've been trying to make sure that we are helping helping our classes now be able to keep their funding and their staffing while we're adjusting to what enrollments will be this next year. So those are some of the ways that we have supported, and definitely know that there's a lot more policy that we put in place to be able to support, continue to have nurses and creating new pathways of opportunities to get more educators in our schools that look and have lived experience as their families that they're serving.
Thank you. Our next question that we received is: what are you doing to improve access to quality mental health care, especially for BIPOC and ESL communities?
Great. Well, I think, again, in this place, one of my big priorities was making sure that we were, as we spoke earlier about early childcare providers not being paid what it actually costs to provide the care, was making sure that we were fighting for increasing rates for our behavioral health providers and creating new opportunities to get more culturally competent and responsive therapists, behavioral health nurses into the pipeline to be able to serve communities, and making sure that they are getting the compensation they need to be able to stay in the field once they get their education. I'm just looking to make sure. And I think that's part of where the Harriet Tubman Healthcare Center is a project that I'm so excited about. It's also, looking at ways that we remove barriers to be able to get people access to mental health. And I'm looking to my staff as I scroll here. So my apologies if my eyes are mixing. And I think the other piece I'd want to add is just, we put a lot of money in trying to create the infrastructure of care that has never gotten the investment it needed. And to make sure that if someone is having a mental health crisis, or if they are in active addiction, that if and when they are ready for care, there is no wrong door. And so we built passed legislation that allows for new centers to open up that basically 24 hours they're able to show up there without having to go into the criminal justice system in order to get access to that care. And we also have expanded investments in the 998 crisis hotline services and establishing a system for crisis relief centers around the state to help grow the behavioral health workforce. And we've funded programs. I think Senator Trudeau spoke to a couple, but there's one in Quinault, in Swinomish, where it is culturally impactful care and it's what we're trying to replicate in more places across our state.
Thank you. Our next question, what kind of, it looks like, I'm assuming that was legislation. What kind of legislation was passed this session to protect reproductive freedom?
Great question. I am going to scroll because I am not great at remembering bill numbers, but we did a few things. And so I just want to make sure I can find it. Here we go. So we made abortion legal a full 2 years before the Supreme Court's Roe versus Wade decision as a state, right? So we are known for leading the way. And what we did this cycle was pass at least 5 bills that I'll mention as briefly as I can. One is SB 5242. It prohibits cost sharing for abortion so that no one seeking an abortion would be required to pay a copayment or meet a deductible to have their services covered. We passed HB 1155, the My Health, My Data Act, prohibits the sale of consumer health data not protected under HIPAA and requires consumer consent. And HB 1469 is what we know as the shield law to protect people seeking an abortion in Washington from prosecution, because we know just across the border in Idaho and other places across our country, we're seeing really repressive laws getting passed. And we will be a place of safe haven for many folks that are facing difficult choices and needing reproductive health care and abortion care. HB 1340 prevents license discipline for health professionals for performing those procedures. And SB 5768 authorized the Department of Corrections to distribute the abortion pill mifepristone. And so that is to make sure that people in Washington have access, because it's one thing for us to have the laws on the book, but if we don't have the supply and we're not able to have practitioners that are able to feel supported, it in essence is a challenge. And so we did laws to be able to pass those laws and hopefully are able to secure and make sure that reproductive justice and access to abortion care is real for every Washingtonian, no matter where you live, and that we can provide some relief and support for those in other states.
All right, thank you. And one more that we weren't able to type yet that just came in is, how will the social equity and cannabis bill impact communities of color?
Great. Thank you for that question, because at the beginning, I talked about 3 bills, and then through the conversation, we heard a few other bills of mine that I was able to prime sponsor and pass. Because social equity in cannabis is another piece of legislation, and we already had the program basically as the pilot. This piece of legislation expanded the opportunity to add 52 more retail licenses across our state, and in addition, added up to 100 licenses in processing and another 10 over time for producers. And so those are the 3 tiers of cannabis industry. And so how it impacts is it creates a social equity application process that whoever, Office of Minority and Women Affairs, if you are basically qualifying that way. So it is centered on people most harmed, which are the Black population and Latino population in the state of Washington. But it really is more expansive in terms of who would qualify or possibly qualify for a social equity applicant. We just are going through the cycle right now with the current amount, which is about 41 licenses, I believe, that were in the first round. And so I think it does create equity in a couple of ways. One, it is a huge revenue for the state of Washington, and being able to create opportunities for people to be small business owners, to take their skill. A lot of folks, especially when there was medical cannabis, got into the field because someone they knew was ill, had cancer, this was an option for supporting people that they cared about. And so that creates revenue. And that revenue, we talked a little bit about how we spent that. It goes into the operating and general fund, which is funding all kinds of issues and needs, including prevention and health and cessation for people that are suffering from addictions or needing access to health care. And that is a big part of how the cannabis revenues get funded, is to expand access to health care for people that don't qualify otherwise. And that's both our immigrant population historically, as well as our single adult population that is low income, and being able to have that care. So that there's that piece. And then I think the other piece that's not in this particular legislation, but was is accompanying to it, is the Community Reinvestment Act, and making sure that the way that revenues are getting reinvested back into our community are recognizing the historic harms that the war on drugs played, and particularly in Central District and Skyway and High Point, where I grew up next to. And so it's looking at where we created generations of harm and trauma that many families are still having to experience the repercussions of, and creating opportunities for home ownership, economic development, being able to restore some semblance of justice for people, and with legal defense, and being able to vacate convictions. Those are some of the things that are eligible funds, and that has gone through a really robust statewide program of community engagement. Many people from our district have been engaged in monitoring that, and we'll be looking over this next year of how that first $200 million will get reinvested back into community.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. We appreciate that. That's all the time that we have for tonight. We want to thank everyone for joining us and for all of your questions. If we didn't get to your question tonight, you can reach out to Senator Saldaña's office. After we conclude, the contact information is going to appear on the screen here in a moment. We also want to give a special thanks to our ASL interpreters tonight. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the staff that's supporting us behind the scenes. With that, I will turn it back over to Senator Saldaña for any final closing remarks.
Thank you so much. This virtual town hall would not be possible without my small but talented and mighty team. It includes my legislative assistant, Raman Khanna, and also my public information officer, Christian Lamas. Thank you to both of you for the work you do to make sure that our office is able to respond and create these opportunities for constituents to participate in. Also want to give a thanks again to our interpreters, to Olivia, who is also part of the Senate Democratic Communications team that pitched in for us, and for all of you for what you do by giving me this honor to represent our community, by what you do every day and showing up in small and big ways to make our community healthier, safer. And I just can't thank you enough for taking any moments of your time to watch this video, to learn about the legislative process, and to engage with me in my office. This is a part-time legislature, but I know that my partner and husband want to thank him and our kids, because they often tell me they don't think it is actually part-time, but I do know that it is an honor and a blessing to be here. And thank you again, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.